transverse processes of the thoracic and lumbar spine. Now, these are actually going to be easier than the cervical ones, okay? So you can warm up your hands with these and then go back and palpate it in your cervical spine. Now, one of the things that came up this morning that we didn't share with the whole group is some of you are struggling to find those kind of lower middle cervical spinous processes because of the ligamentum nuchae. One of the things is when you're in prone, some of you are fairly hyperextended, and what you may want to do is put a pillow under the person's chest, which drops their head forward, which will make those spinous processes pop out. Okay, so that's a strategy you might want to try if you're having trouble finding them. In some people, it's just hard to find, and so don't stress over it. Just practice on a lot of people to feel a lot of different people's cervical spine. So we've got some goofiness in the thoracic spine. So in the cervical spine, we talked about the spinous process and the transverse processes were in a single line across. That's also true for the lumbar spine. So good news. Cervical and lumbar have just really easy palpation. The thoracic spine throws us for a loop. So T1 and T2 and T11 and T12, okay, so these transition vertebrae, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. The spinous process is a half a level lower than the transverse processes, okay? So in the, Jess, could you turn the skeleton around for me, please? So,
yeah, they are.
So we have these droopy spinous processes in the thoracic spine. So in T1, T2, T11, and T12, the spinous process is actually going to be 1/2 level lower than the transverse processes for that segment. For T3 through T10, the spinous process is going to be a full level lower than the transverse processes for that segment. The spinous process is going to be a full level lower than the transverse processes for T3 through T10. Okay? The other thing is the transverse processes are going to now be quite wide. Compared to the cervical spine where our fingers were about 1 inch apart, we're now going to be pretty wide, palpating those transverse processes. Okay? Now, again, a good landmark for the upper thoracic is to find C7 again, and then work your way down from C7. From the bottom, the iliac crests are going to typically be around the L4, L5 interspace, okay, generally. So that gives you a landmark low. Again, generally, the spine of the scapula is going to come over and be at about the spinous process of T3 and the transverse processes of T4. And the inferior angle of the scapula with the arms at the side are going to be approximately at the spinous process of T7 and the transverse processes of T8. Okay, so those give you some general landmarks for the spine for where you're at. So on the exam, you may be asked to palpate the T8 transverse process. You may want to start, that's a bad example because it's like square in the middle. Say you get T10, you're probably going to want to palpate from the bottom up, okay? If you get T3, you're going to want to find C7 and palpate down. So there's nothing magical. Can I have you go ahead and lie down for me, Hayden? So just like I did in the cervical spine, are you okay that way? Can you breathe?
Yeah.
All right. Breathing is important. So I'm going to find those. Aubrey doesn't agree. So I'm gonna find those segments. Again, there aren't a lot of muscles directly over the spine. There aren't any. And we have that supraspinous ligament now that's connecting those spinous processes, right? So it's going to be easier to feel. And so some of you are still wanting to do this when you palpate, but if you just simply rub your hand along the spine, those spinous processes will pop out at you, and then you've got one, okay? And then, again, I am going to keep my hands on them while I find others, and then work my way up or down, okay? Now, for transverse processes, there are going to be a lot of muscles going on. So we've got our paraspinals. We've got, when we're up in the thoracic region, we're going to have a lot of our parascapular muscles. We're going to have the 1 to 3 segment rotators that we have to palpate through, okay? So for transverse processes, we are going to be fairly vertical. I do tend to use my thumbs because I am looking for symmetry. I am looking for that rotation, okay? And you see how wide I am. I'm pretty wide when I'm looking at transverse processes, but I'm palpating through all of those muscles. Hayden has a little bit of tightness. Is that sore?
No.
There? Okay. Because I'd really like to work on that if you said yes. So you can go along there and find those transverse processes. Now, unlike the cervical spine, where there really is no osseous gap between the segments, here it's going to be really clear. So when you're out in the transverse process range, again, if I just went up and down, you would feel the hills and valleys of a transverse process into soft tissue, okay? So you can also just get a feel of how far apart they are. So he's got, can you see me going over that muscle? So he's got some stuff going on there that's pretty tight. So you want to try to get through that or work on it. One of the two.
Are you going through the muscle, or do you want to kind of move it to the side?
So for him, I'm not getting through this. So if this was an exam, I would just work on it so that then I could look underneath what was going on. I would just break right into treatment. Okay, so I'm moving my hand a lot because I'm not looking for specific transverse processes. I'm just feeling like a series of them as I run back and forth, okay? Now, the angle of the ribs they're going to be, so that's the apex of the ribs posteriorly is the angle of the ribs. And so that's going to be wider, and you're going to be lateral to the paraspinals, okay? And here you're just palpating along here, and you'll feel the ribs extremely well, okay? And here again, you could have them breathe, and you're looking for movement on either side. You can look for anterior versus posterior, but these are the rib angles way out at the side. We're palpating more than I told you I was going to, I'm sorry. For rib 11 and 12, those are our floating ribs. Those are kind of a bugger to palpate. So what you want to do, just like we do for finding the iliac crest, you want to come down and use the side of your index fingers to find the bottom of the ribs. Now, 11 is going to be a longer rib that makes it almost to the side. So once I found the bottom rib that goes all the way around, I'm going to go a little bit lower. And actually, I'm going to go onto your side. Okay, so right here is the tip of your 11. Do you feel that, Hayden?
Yeah.
So this one does not connect in the front, but do you see how lateral I am? Okay. I won't keep pressing on it because that isn't really very fun. Now, I can follow that rib back. Yeah, it's not so super cool. Rib 12 is much shorter, so it's about 4 or 5 inches. And find that from 11, so follow 11 back. And again, you're going to feel the end of 12, okay, as you press in. All right? Scapula, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a good. So we're